OJ Simpson, a former football star who is also known for his acquittal on a double murder charges, has died at the age of 76. Simpson revealed that he was undergoing chemotherapy for an unspecified type of cancer in May of last year. It was announced today that he lost his battle to prostate cancer. The 1985 Hall of Famer was accused of killing his ex-wife, Nicole Brown, and her friend, Ron Goldman, back in 1994. He was acquitted on both counts of murder the following year. In 2008, he was arrested again and this time sentenced to 33 years in prison for kidnapping and armed robbery. He was released on parole after 9 years in Nevada prison. Now, we have Michael Bryan with us, a true treat just to have him on in general, but we're going to learn a little bit more as to why it's so special to have Mr. Bryan on with us right now. Now, do you think, Michael, and just checking, are you there with us?
I am here.
Perfect. So we'll just start off from the top. Do you think it paved the way, I guess, it being the former criminal case, how criminal defense attorneys approach trials like this, in the sense of, we all now as defense attorneys, I know I've probably said it once or twice, in some way, shape, or form, if it doesn't fit, you must acquit. Do you think that acquittal has affected the criminal justice system going forward?
Boy, that is a weighty question for such a pea-brain of my own, but I will give you my best shot at it. I think it's changed a lot of things, not just the fact that it was televised, that everybody was hanging on the edge of their seats for the verdict, but how we look at the investigation of crime, the presentation by the prosecution, and therefore, to your point, the defense. You know, what can the defense do? As you know, you're zealously representing your client. You know, what can they do to make the jury wonder, is there reasonable doubt? And we know in the OJ case from '94 that it was, some shady dealings with some of the investigation. And once you taint the investigation, you opened up a big old hole that the jury can, find some reasonable doubt in. And I think that is probably the biggest takeaway from that first trial.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I know that many of us here at Law and Crime may not have been around, let's say, for lack of a better term, during this trial. I think if my math is correct, I had just finished the first grade and I was going into the second grade during that infamous Bronco chase. But Michael, you have a very special connection to this case and also OJ Simpson's many, or I guess both, criminal cases. Talk to us about your involvement in this story from its onset and then moving forward all the way to those armed robbery charges and even some interviews that you may have done.
Yeah, I was old back then, Brian. I covered it back in '94, like most people did, and watched it. Remember, the key difference was that it was really the first time we got to see the Mendez trial. Also was similar. Court TV was new at the time, but there was no Law and Crime. There was no real streaming service. It was one shot for people to watch this show. Where else? And I say show. Where else do you get 100 million people hanging on the edge of their seats for the verdict? And there were only like 240 million in the whole country at the time. So this was huge, and it was the first time a legal proceeding was really showcased like this. So I was following it like everybody else. That was as close as I got to being involved. But I was down there and watched a lot of the trial unfold over the months. But then in '08, when he was arrested for the armed robbery and kidnapping related to the theft of his own memorabilia, by the way, from that Las Vegas hotel, then I kind of jumped in with both feet. And my company at the time, the Legal Edge Network, we streamed the trial. Nobody else was doing streaming back then. I was kind of ahead of my time. There was no Law and Crime Network back then either. And so it was kind of interesting from that standpoint. But I lived there, basically, and I'm hanging out with, that's probably the wrong phrase, but I'm spending a lot of time with OJ in the hallways in between the testimony, and he's as lighthearted as anybody who's facing 30-some years in prison as a person could be. I think it was just bizarre to see him, compartmentalize what was hanging over his head, almost as if the '94 acquittal made him feel like, I'm impervious to this stuff. Man, I got off on 2 murders. You think a lousy kidnapping, armed robbery charge is a big deal? I don't. And that's why I think I got to know him a little bit and ultimately do the interview, which was really the last on-camera interview he ever did because he was convicted 3 days after I did that interview.
Yeah. And just to give our viewers some context, I know a lot of people focus on the double homicide case. For OJ Simpson, he was convicted, as Michael was saying, in 2008, I believe, the armed robbery and gunpoint robbery, for his getting his memorabilia back. Sentenced to 33 years with eligibility of parole after 9 years. He did end up getting released to parole, and I think 4 years after that, parole ended. Michael, you have a unique kind of angle here in the sense of you interviewed OJ Simpson. So what can you tell people who have never had that opportunity to have that one-on-one conversation with OJ Simpson, the Juice, as many people have called him? What can you reveal as his personality, his thoughts, the way he interacted with the criminal justice system? What were you left with?
I'm telling you, he is, and I don't say this to be kind of a smart aleck, but he was the nicest killer I ever met. And in this business, we meet a lot of nefarious types, but he's a charming dude. And, once you get him talking about his favorite subject, which is OJ, he kind of bonds with you. And that's how I led him to kind of give me a clue where he might be on a given weekend. Hey, it's Friday. What do you got planned for the weekend there, Mr. Simpson? I'm going to be with my friends, family, going to go to church. Oh, really? You go to church here in the Vegas area? Those two concepts don't necessarily mix, church and Vegas. But he told me where the church was. And I said, that's great. When, any idea what time? Now, at this point, he knows I'm going to be stalking him, so he gives me a wrong time. I go to church 2 hours early, and sure enough, he's there. So in a way, it's his mind game, and he was trying to give me a little bit, but not too much. And he kind of smirked when I saw him there, but he didn't have to give me that interview. He could have walked right past me. This guy's in the middle of trial, which led me to do what many have said was a kind of a softball interview. Well, yeah, you're right, because I'm an officer of the court before I'm a reporter. And the last thing I'm going to do is disrupt an ongoing felony trial for my own, self-serving purpose. Ooh, I want to get a better interview. I'm going to ask him about the details of the crimes he's alleged of committing. I can't do that. And so it was more, if you look at it now, and it's out there. If you look at it now, in retrospect, you can see this guy that's somehow able to just put the potential doom hanging over his head in some other room and just be a happy-go-lucky dude. And maybe that's because you beat a double murder rap. Who knows? Yeah.
And Michael, I'm going to ask you the same question that I think so many people ask me or other attorneys when you talk about OJ Simpson. Feel free to answer as Michael Bryan, the person, or Michael Bryan, Esquire, whichever you feel comfortable with. But in that double murder case, do you think he got away with murder?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, I watched it like everybody else, and I don't think there are a lot of people that feel he's truly innocent. They may feel that it wasn't proven that he was guilty, but I don't think folks feel, if they're truly honest with themselves, that he was innocent of what happened that night. That's my take.
Right. Michael Bryan, thank you for your take on that. All right, we're going to jump into some of that parole hearing that Michael Bryan was talking about. Of course, not for the double homicide because he was acquitted, but for that gunpoint robbery that he was ultimately convicted of and did 9 years in prison. Let's take a listen right now.
Well, my question was, that's why you went into the
Oh, yeah, yes, sir.
Because you believed that the property was yours.
Yes, man. Whenever he was just telling me, when Mauricio was calling me, just telling me this, I wasn't interested. It wasn't until he got actual pictures of what they supposedly had, and because it was family photos and stuff, that's when I got interested in going there, and I only went there to retrieve my own property.
What were you thinking when the guns were being brandished?
Well, I didn't see the guns brandished. I didn't see, you say guns, as I understand it, one guy who was behind me somewhere pointed a gun at him. So I never saw him brandish a gun. When I left there, I called back to the room to ask Bruce, you said that there was some pictures, what do you have? And I asked him, did this Walter Alexander return his cell phone? He told me no, and he says, OJ, it wasn't cool that guy pointed a gun at me. I said, who pointed a gun at you? He says that, he kind of described who it was. And to be honest, I didn't really believe him at the time. I asked the 3 guys I was with, they all said they didn't see him do it. I got back to my hotel. We waited for these 2 security guys to show up. And the minute they drove up, the first thing I said, man, did you pull a gun in that room? And he swore, no, I haven't. He didn't. And I asked Walter Alexander for the cell phone, and he kind of threw the cell phone to me. but I wasn't aware until I was in the car driving back to our hotel that this guy had actually pointed a gun at him. Now, earlier in the day when he was talking to me, trying to get me to let him come, I didn't hire him. He said it was for free and all of that. He did show me. I didn't know this guy. I knew the Alexander guy, but I didn't know this guy. He showed me his license. He showed me his CCR. I've assumed that the state gives a guy a CCR and stuff. They vetted him. I should have vetted him. I didn't really need him. I knew these guys weren't dangerous. So that was on me.
Your version of the offenses differ a little bit of the official records, Mr. Simpson, but moving forward here, considering the fact that what we have on record, weapons were brandished, you were there.
Oh, I was there. I mean,
taken.
I'm sorry.
So my next question is for you, is what do you think was the impact on your victims?
Well, I know what the impact was. I mean, we've talked about it. I mean, Mr. Beardsley, we had long talks back then. He told me that he had tried to call my lawyer. He testified in court that he had called my lawyers and tried to tell them in the months previous that guys had my property and they were trying to sell them, but my lawyer never called him back. He actually testified for me, I'm sure you know, during the trial. Bruce and I talked, and Bruce was traumatized by it. Fortunately, as I said, we talked it out. He knew that would have never condoned what happened. He accepted my apology.
All right, we're going to take a quick break because, as you can see, we have former OJ Simpson attorney Alan Dershowitz with us. I'll start off with this, just initial reaction to his death.
Well, I'm sad. I got to know him fairly well during the 2 years that I was one of his lawyers. He will always have a mixed legacy. He helped expose the racial divide we have in this country. He helped to expose police corruption among certain Los Angeles police officers, and he became the chief educator for many in America when they saw his trial on television. It was the first complete trial ever shown on television, and people who watched the whole trial were not as surprised at the verdict as people who just saw snippets of it or read about it in the very biased newspaper accounts, which didn't, for example, disclose the most important piece of evidence in the case. The most important piece of evidence in the case was a sock which purportedly had the blood of OJ Simpson and his victim, alleged victim, on the sock. And we were able to prove that that blood was poured on the sock by Officer Van Adder, who didn't realize that the test tube had EDTA, a chemical that's not found in the human body. So we were able to prove conclusively by chemistry and by blood splatter evidence that that piece of evidence was fixed, was distorted, and that they attempted to frame him for a murder they honestly believed he had committed.
Yeah. And because I have you here, I really want to ask this question, both as a defense attorney and someone who watches trials. How do you think that the case, the double homicide case against OJ Simpson, both affected the way that potential jurors and maybe trial viewers look at cases with a critical eye, and I think you kind of hinted at it to some degree, with a critical eye, but also as a former public defender myself and defense attorney now, how do you think attorneys view the ability to show reasonable doubt in cases that are so high profile and at first glance look like, hey, I don't really have much here?
Well, for 30 years before the O.J. Simpson case, I was teaching my students, if you want to be a good defense lawyer, you have to be a scientist. You have to know everything possible about DNA. You have to know everything possible about blood splatter. And I think this helped educate a whole generation of defense attorneys to emulate what the defense team in this case did. We won this case through science. We won it for two reasons. One, we had the better science. And number two, Darden and Clark were not up to the job. For example, Darden could have easily required O.J. Simpson to put the glove on outside the presence of the jury to see whether it fit. But he was so arrogant that he did it in front of the jury. And I was there. I was just 2-3 feet away when O.J. Simpson went up to the jury and showed them that it didn't fit. It was too small. And after that, I was able to persuade him not to take the witness stand. I said, "You've already testified and you haven't been subject to cross-examination the perfect way." And he finally agreed with me and not F. Lee Bailey and decided not to take the witness stand. I think if he had taken the witness stand, the verdict would have been the same as in the civil case, which was the verdict of liability.
Yeah, and everyone remembers that. I mean, we started on this show and I said, hey, I know the OJ Simpson story mainly through history. I think I was going from the first to the second grade when he was arrested. But we all remember that image of the glove going on. Talk to us about the moments beforehand, because as a defense attorney, in my mind, that's a major risk. Because if that goes on in the wrong way, that could be very incriminating, but obviously worked out very well. So talk to us about the thoughts before that and the moment as you're sitting there and you're seeing it doesn't fit.
Well, remember, we didn't put the glove on. The prosecution did. They had the option of not doing it. We probably wouldn't have done it. We probably wouldn't have taken that risk, but they took the risk and they didn't have to, because they could have had him try it on before. And so literally sitting next to him, sitting near him, I just saw it and I saw how the jury reacted. And they were all shocked because the prosecution had placed so much emphasis on that glove, and the glove didn't fit. Why it didn't fit, we don't know. He was wearing a latex glove underneath it, number one. Number two, it had been in a refrigerator and probably had shrunk. There were all kinds of reasons for the prosecution to be skeptical about whether it would fit, but they put so much reliance on it. And then, of course, lawyer Corcoran, who was a great, great lawyer, came up along with the other defense team with the phrase, "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." And that became a kind of mantra for the case. But I do think that the sock was an even more important piece of evidence, because we were able to prove beyond any doubt that that sock had been tampered with and that the police had tried to create a false piece of evidence in an effort to frame what they believed was a guilty person. But we caught them, and I think police are less likely to do that now.
Yeah. And I think because of that, you have, not just in that county, in that case, framed the way that many defense attorneys, I would include myself as well, argue cases. So for that and your entire team, I want to say thank you. I know that we've monopolized enough of your time. You're a very popular man and got a lot of other things to do. So thank you for taking the time to join us here today.
Sure, thank you.
All right, all the best. Okay, well, Alan Dershowitz is gone, but we're still sticking around. We're going to continue with more of that parole hearing that we were talking about. Again, nothing to do with the double homicide case that we typically know OJ Simpson for, but for that parole hearing involving the kidnapping and robbery of his own memorabilia. Let's take a listen.
I told him that these guys should be put in jail. If they did that, I wasn't going to defend them. Unfortunately, they got a G card when they say OJ told me. Nothing I could do about that. But I want to point out that, Bruce, I knew his family. I mean, when his mother was terminally ill, I'd call, she was a fan, I'd call her and sing to her. The night before or the night of the jury's verdict, his son actually called me and tried to give me a head up on something to do with memorabilia, and told me that he and his mother was cheering for me. This family knows that I wouldn't wish any harm on these guys ever. These friends of mine, and I think
I'm sorry, that's on me. I spoke too much with Alan, and now we're running out of time. But we're going to take a quick break and come back with more of this hearing that we were talking about, OJ Simpson, following the death of a man acquitted and convicted of different charges, but also a very famous football player, record-breaking football player in college and the NFL. We'll see you back on the other side.